Purple Daily is daily Vikings entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.
I will ride with this group.
Seriously, man. Please.
And away we go.
The Vikings' disrespect is palpable around the country right now. We're going to tell you why, and we're going to go through and decide if there's some viable points here. But before we get into this Vikings disrespect and a hard count with a few interesting things, Judd, tell the audience about our friends at Finch Home Solutions, if you could, please.
Most definitely I will, because Finch Home Solutions is where you want to call, where you want to go if you have any electrical needs in your home. Guess what? If you're watching this, you can see right there, the Finch vans are out there on the streets, and they are just waiting for your phone call. The Finch mobiles are all over, and if they look like they resemble a certain football team in town, it's because there are no bigger Vikings fans in this town. And guess what? They've got a special deal right now. If you are a listener and you spend over $500, you get $100 off. So you make sure you tell Cody and his team that you heard about this on PD. No dispatch fees, by the way, for educators in the month of June, and 10% off. So if you're a teacher, you got some projects around the home, Finch Home Solutions is going to cut you some slack. We're talking about remodeling projects. We're talking about hot tubs. We're talking about anything big or small that requires an electrician. Finch Home Solutions has the answer. 612-357-2604. FinchHomeSolutions.com. FinchHomeSolutions.com.
Yes. So, okay. 3 different categories of disrespect that I want to set up for you guys. And you tell me, okay, let's be objective about this, Vikings fans. I know it's hard to hear negative critique about your favorite football team. Is this disrespectful, or are there some grains of truth here? So, number 1, I was combing through the sports books on the internet this morning. A lot of them are back to 6.5. Some of them jumped to like 7.5 around draft time.
Mm-hmm.
BetMGM, 6.5. DraftKings has the Vikings at 6.5. 3 other sports books I looked at, including Bet Rivers and Bally's, your favorite one, Judd, have the Vikings at 6.5. So the sports books, very low on the Vikings.
Mm-hmm.
ESPN's FPI, that's the Football Power Index.
Football power.
This is where it gets real.
Football Power Index has the Vikings ranked 25th. Projected to win between 6 and 7 games, which is tied with the Commanders and Giants. 14% chance to make the playoffs. 3% chance only to win the division. And a 0.2% chance to win the Super Bowl. So the Football Power Index is very low.
Okay.
And then this is more of a subjective critique from one particular author, but SI.com's Monday Morning Quarterback, led by Albert Breer, and he brought in a couple of his cohorts. They did an article entitled "The Least Improved NFL Teams This Offseason." And Gilberto Manzano predicts the Vikings will finish 3-14 this year. And here's what he writes. I would have felt better about the Vikings had they traded up to get Drake May in the draft. Instead, they waited to take J.J. McCarthy, the 5th quarterback selected. McCarthy was impressive during Michigan's playoff games, but he has a boomer bust potential because he wasn't asked to do much in Jim Harbaugh's run-heavy offense. The Vikings could lean on Sam Darnold, but he wasn't good at making quick decisions with New York and Carolina. This goes beyond quarterback. Minnesota didn't do much to address the weak interior lines on offense and defense. There's also concerns at cornerback. And you could make a case that Danielle Hunter swapping for Jonathan Grenard is a minus for the Vikings. Perhaps I'm being too harsh with my 3-14 prediction, but there are too many concerns at critical spots for the Vikings. Sports books are low. ESPN's Football Power Index is low. All of them saying 6.5 wins. And then MMQB on SI.com saying it's going to be worse than that. Disrespect or truth?
Somewhere in the middle. And I have zero problem with this, because if you're a national pundit or you're trying to crunch what all 32 teams in this wonderful league are doing, I think these conclusions make some sense. I think you have to be here. I think you have to be located in the vicinity of TCO Performance Center to understand what the Vikings are doing here. And so there is some truth here. That being said, I think the write-up that you just read is a little bit of a boilerplate of what the assumptions are. You don't break down, just for instance, for the long term here. Danielle Hunter's loss looks huge, and I'm not trying to dismiss it, but you don't break down the fact that Brian Flores actually has, I think, without question, a better defensive core right now than he did a year ago. If you're also moving on to the 49ers next, and then you're doing some Seahawks, and then you got some Bengals, and then you got some Browns, right? Like you're trying to keep track of every team. That's tough. We keep track here on this fine show of one team, and so I do think that there is some truth here. Like, am I expecting great things? If this team wins 6 or 7 games, am I going to be like, oh my God, everyone has to go? I'm astounded. No. Do I think 3 is highly unlikely? Absolutely. But I think we're in the middle here. I think there's a general assumption of things being made by people, and some of those assumptions are fair. I think some of those assumptions come without understanding where this team is trying to go. And I don't think anybody, if you give Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi and Rob Brzezinski and everybody else, if you pump them full of truth serum here and now, right today, and say, what's the plan here? I don't think they're going to say, well, the plan is to win a Super Bowl this year. They'll say that publicly now, but I don't think they would say it privately. So I don't really struggle with this. And if they win 7 games, I'm not going to blow a gasket. I think what they're doing makes sense in terms of trying to build a championship team. 2 years after keeping a core group together, having a really nice season and a disappointing playoff. One thing I think people are forgetting, though, is this. As good as Kirk Cousins was statistically last year, before the Achilles blew, the reality is this team got off to a bad start. So, there's this assumption that the Vikings were, I feel like there's this assumption, well, if Kirk hadn't got hurt because they actually gone on a streak, this team was a Super Bowl team or something like that. That's not the case. This team got off to a bad start, and that was with Kirk playing well. So I do think we're having people draw conclusions that they don't fully understand, because from there, they just go to the next conclusion, which is the Bears conclusion. And then they go to the Bengals conclusion. And we all know that if you're trying to cover multiple teams, it makes it very hard to really succinctly and accurately summarize one team.
So on the sportsbook front, I do kind of understand what they're probably trying to think here. So Kirk Cousins, as a starter, led the Vikings to 4 wins. Every other quarterback that started the Vikings, 3 wins. So they're going to double that to 6.5. And I would personally still hammer that over as a Vikings fan. But that does make sense from a national sports book of, hey, that team won 3 games without Kirk Cousins last year with starting quarterbacks. And now they're getting Sam Darnold. I don't know if we should have it that high. And then they have a big roster turnover. That Darnold effect, again, even though there are some people that probably say, hey, this is the best car he's ever driven, it is still Sam Darnold driving the car, who doesn't have a good history of necessarily driving bad cars or good cars. So I get some of the disrespect that is coming in from them. Personally, I would hammer the over of a win total, and anything after that is extra gravy. I would be shocked if the Vikings were a 3 or 4 win team. It'd have to be catastrophic injuries and just completely ineffectiveness and a mutiny inside the locker room. And then that could equal a 3 or 4 win team. But in terms of just everyone healthy and them just not clicking, them being 3 and 4 wins, no, I don't see that being the case.
Yeah, if the 3-14 thing as just a separate anecdote, if this team is healthy and wins 3 games, there's major foundational stuff that needs to be talked about that currently isn't on anyone's radar. I'm with Declan. It would be a shock, or it would involve Darisaw and Justin Jefferson go down with injuries or something. So, okay, here's where I will say Monday morning quarterback guy is right on the money. The interior of the offensive and more specifically defensive lines, very weak for the Vikings relative to the rest of the league. The Vikings, outside of really Harrison Phillips, don't have any trustworthy, established, viable, impactful down lineman in that Brian Flores defense. And Harrison Phillips is really good, but he's not like, think about your top, the Matabuikes and, Aaron Donald is one of the greatest of all time before he retired. Chris Jones, like the Vikings don't have a guy like that on the interior. And they're trying to figure out if they have NFL caliber guys, period, that they can rotate in behind Harrison Phillips. So I agree with that. Interior offensive line, you're kind of back to the same drawing board you've been at for years, which is, Bradbury is, if he's healthy, like a league average center. And then you're wondering if Ed Ingram can take a step forward and then a competition at left guard. So I agree, interior offensive and defensive lines, which is what sets the tone for your entire football team. That's a work in progress using next year's draft and free agency. So I agree on that. However, how many teams in the NFL can genuinely say they are better at these spots than the Vikings? Wide receiver. You could argue like Bengals or now
you can
that
be deeper, yeah. but not top end better.
Yeah, and if you want to argue that someone's deeper, or if you want to argue that the Bengals situation or whatever,
right.
But it's not more than 2 or 3, certainly not more than 5 teams that are better at wide receiver.
Yep.
Left and right tackle. How many teams in the NFL have a better left and right tackle combination than the Vikings right now? It's 3. You could argue it's 0, but it's certainly not more than 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. And those are 2 of the most important spots on the field. Mm-hmm. And I can keep going. This author brings up edge rusher. Okay, how many, and the answer isn't 0, but how many edge rusher rooms are better than if Van Ginkel comes back healthy for the start of the season, and I get between Van Ginkel and Grenard, not even counting Dallas Turner for a second, those guys combined for 20 sacks last year and like 110 pressures, and I get maybe the best edge rusher in the draft at age 22. So, yeah, I'm not saying it's the best edge rusher room in the NFL. There's some dudes like Aiden Hutchinson and Max Crosby,
right.
and
but it's got depth.
But it's not bottom half of the league.
Right.
And then linebacker safety. If you combined everyone's linebacker safety rooms, there's what I'm saying is there's a ton of talent on this team. It is not a finished product. To suggest 3 wins is absurd. And I would say if this team stays relatively healthy and if they don't finish second in the league in turnovers like they did last year, the over 6.5 is the easiest money of any team in the NFL right now. And I'm not saying 12, but I'm saying 7, 8, or 9 if this team stays healthy and gets any semblance of competent quarterback play out of J.J. McCarthy or Sam Darnold. So that's where I'm at with it.
Let's talk about the O-line as well, though, because I think there's and we've discussed this occasionally, but I think there's a misperception about this thing. So one is, I agree completely. The defensive line, they tried, they have not addressed it yet as far as the interior goes. They just haven't. And I think for the second consecutive year, in this case, Flores is going to have to get creative. Now, perhaps some guys emerge a bit, but the fact is you might have to get creative. And then a year from now, going into 2025, it needs to be, and it can be because you're going to have cap space, addressed. But offensive line, I feel like we're going back to the old, the offensive line. This Vikings offensive line was not taken care of for a long time. It was not watered. It was not cultivated. It was a plant that was basically allowed to just basically wither away and die. That's not the case now. I think we all agree. We would all love to see at some point in time, this team go get a left guard who can kick ass, or a center who can just kick ass, a Kelsey type of guy. But the reality is, Phil, starting with what you said, with the tackles and the interior line, this line was not some type of hot mess in 2023. No. But I feel like I think the interior of the defensive line is a problem. I think the interior.
They still ranked 15th in total defense with that flaw in play, right?
Exactly. But the offensive line, can it be improved for a championship caliber line? Yes. But is it this now still flawed piece of garbage that we complained about? No. So I think the national people have sort of picked up on that. And now, and this is, again, this is what happens when you cover a ton of teams. You often run with storylines that are a year or 2 old. And so there's this perception. Now the Vikings offensive line, and part of that is because the Crusaders for how long said, well, what's Kirk supposed to do? Well, he's supposed to move a little bit once in a while. He's supposed to
Overcome
avoid a
it.
rush. He's
Yeah.
supposed to get rid of the football. So I just caution against this whole offensive line thing. I think we need to nip this in the bud. Is it the greatest interior O-line? No, it can be improved. But is it this like listless piece of garbage? No.
I would say if you're making a list of the main things or components that would push the Vikings win total under the 6.5, if you had really poor play in both trenches, like interior offensive line is as bad as it's been in years, and interior defensive line, but again, like interior defensive line basically the same as it was last year, and you still found a way to work around it to get to 15th in points allowed from 30th or whatever.
Yeah.
And you've added other pieces. I know you didn't address that specific need,
Right.
but you've added another couple interesting edge rushers. You've added Blake Cashman. So I mean, the defense has better personnel than it did last year. Mm-hmm. But I would say if the trenches are a total train wreck, okay, that's going to push you to the 6.5. If you can't get, if the best you can do at quarterback is just like hand the ball off and throw checkdowns, and you can't get anything out of Sam Darnold or rookie JJ McCarthy, obviously that's going to push you down. And then the schedule, it is a tough schedule. Strength of schedule, the Vikings are near the top in terms of hardest schedules, and they only play 4 home games before December 1st.
Yeah.
So if like 2 out of those 3 things become a really big problem, like your schedule lives up to how hard it's going to be on paper, Sam Darnold does not emerge as a viable quarterback, and JJ McCarthy isn't ready, and you still have lingering problems in the trenches. Okay, like a couple, 2 or 3 of those things combined together, maybe now it's a 6-win team, not counting injuries, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Just feels like a lot of 6.5 feels. I mean, Declan kind of nailed the basic math of it. They're looking and saying, well, they played a half season with Kirk and they won 4 games. And then they played another half season without Kirk and they won 3 games. And so if you play a full season and you double the 3, that gets you to 6. Okay, 6.5.
Well, and the quarterbacks that did play after Kirk, like started off with a guy that they literally obtained days before he played. Like he had no time. Jaron Hall was flat out not prepared to play, and it's not his fault. He's a 5th-round pick. Mm-hmm. And then Mullins is a guy who was hurt, came back. So, like, at least in this case with Darnold, you're prepping someone to start throughout all of the off-season camps. I'd prefer that chance to, hey, let's throw this guy in. Now let's try this guy.
One more question off this before we get to a hard count with some interesting stuff that KOC told Rich Eisen and a tampering update. Let's say, I know we've spent the last like 20 minutes pushing back at this disrespect and the 6.5 and whatever. But let's say they finish with 5 wins, however it happens. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, unless you see major cracks in the coaching foundation or like, whoa, JJ McCarthy with fully healthy weapons is completely in over his head. You know, there's a couple things where you turn a side eye toward, but if they just kind of got swallowed up by Sam Darnold wasn't that great, the schedule's really tough, and yeah, they need just better trenches play, which they can address in the spring next year. It wouldn't torture me if they were a 5 or a 6-win team and just got a really good draft pick. It wouldn't, like, this is not a year where you are pushing to win a Super Bowl, despite the macro mission statement of this show and Vikings fans.
The only thing that would really upset me is if things started to go sideways and they panicked and played McCarthy, which I think would be ridiculous.
Too early.
Ridiculous. I mean, it looks like they have a plan here, and I don't think they're going to be impacted by the media, which they shouldn't, by the fan base. But yeah, if you start Darnold, you have a couple guys go down, you know, if Jefferson or Addison gets hurt with the way this thing's constructed right now at receiver, your life becomes extremely difficult. But let's say worst case, you win 4 games. Yeah, it's a good draft pick. I think that the most valuable thing on this team is the time that you're buying for McCarthy. And unless they break the glass on that, which I would hate to see, I'm going to have a hard time being upset unless we see something we're not expecting right now, which I don't think we're going to.
what's interesting, as I turn my mic back on, what's interesting is last year the Titans, okay? So they draft Will Levis. They go 6-11. Like, not a great season necessarily. Levis makes some starts. They blow out Mike Vrabel, which was a big shock. And then all of a sudden, they're building things up, right? They add in free agency. They have a little bit of a draft. Now there's some steam about the Titans. Now, sportsbooks still look at them as a 6.5 win team, at least on FanDuel. So they're still waiting to see it play out. But there's buzz around the Titans that I've seen of people being like, hey, don't sleep on the Titans. Not like as being a contender, but as someone that can exceed their expectations because they surrounded now their sophomore quarterback with some talent around him. So maybe that blueprint of what that could look like is probably going to be similar to what the Vikings could have next year, which is even more cap space and maybe even better draft picks. We'll certainly see there. But I think that might be a good mirror to look at of how are people looking at the Titans right now? Are they going to be looking at the Vikings kind of in a similar boat this time next year?
The Bears are another one, though, or in terms of like perception, both teams won 7 games last year. I haven't looked exactly where the sports books have the Bears, but I think it's more than 6.5 in a lot of them. It's like 7.5. Mm-hmm. I might be wrong on that, but the general perception of the Bears is, that's a team to look out for. Look at the talent they have. Look at the young quarterback they just drafted. Look at the direction that franchise is moving into. I have questions about Caleb Williams and the Bears' ability to. Which head coach would you rather have right now? Vikings or Bears?
Yeah, I'll pass on the defensive guy. Well, and Caleb's being thrown in, I think, without question, week 1, too, which I'm not a big fan of. So, yeah. And here's the thing with the Vikings start, too. So I think it's become a big deal that the perception is, or that they flat out, that the Vikings, like their first 7 games, are going to be underdogs in each game. But the reality is they start against the Giants. To me, that's a toss-up game. You could easily win that game. So now if we're talking about results, you win a game. Like this, if you win a game, you're going to probably win 2 within the first 3 weeks. My point is, you don't know how this is going to go. You don't know. And I'm not even trying to talk them up. I honestly...
Well, Homer.
But that's the thing is, it's not like you're starting on a Thursday night against the Chiefs. You're starting against the Giants. Again, go back and look at their start with Kirk, and we can absolve Kirk. I don't even care at this point. Doesn't matter anymore. But go back and look at their start last year. It was a lousy start. They were
to lose that first game to Tampa.
Yeah, and what you just brought up earlier, Phil, you're fumbling the ball. You're throwing picks. That's what submarines your ass.
It is. I mean, people are not paying enough attention to that one statistic, which is, again, the Vikings, they turned the ball over through fumbles and interceptions 34 times. I believe it was last year.
Yeah.
It was an average of twice per game. And the best teams in terms of turnover prevention were more in that 12 to 14 turnover range. And there's a little bit of skill to it. Obviously, if you have a quarterback that doesn't know what he's looking at and takes too many sacks, boom, strip sacks happen. That's going to happen. But a lot of those turnovers, fumbles, and some of the interceptions that are tipped, you're not going to play year after year and finish second in turnovers. There's a volatility and a luck factor to that. So if you just like regress back to the middle of the pack and only turn the ball over 20 times,
right,
and that's 12 fewer or whatever, 14 fewer turnovers, and nothing else changes, you might make the playoffs by just not turning the ball over.
And weren't they exceptionally good with the football in O'Connell's first year in 2022?
Yes.
And if you go back, so opening week, if I'm not mistaken, week 1, Tampa Bay loss at US Bank Stadium last year. That's the one where Kirk threw the ball slightly behind KJ in the red zone and got picked off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I'm not mistaken, if they get that touchdown, which was very possible, they win that game.
I thought the ball was placed well. I don't know why you have to place
blame on the quarterback. It was slightly behind, and KJ didn't turn out to be as good as we thought. If the receiver gets his hands
on the football, he should catch the football.
Yeah, but anyway, but the point is that's the point. A lot of these games are, hey, if you don't screw up here, you're probably going to win.
Yep.
So we'll see.
Yes, indeed. Okay, let's get to a hard count here, gentlemen.
Green 18! Green 18!
Where we go around the NFL and football world and in some cases just tie things back to the Vikings after we shout out our friends at the Meadows at Mystic, Declan, a glorious golf mecca.
Absolutely. You got Father's Day coming up here in a couple weeks. Maybe you and your old man want to go out, play a little bit of golf. You should do it at the Meadows at Mystic Lake. Book those tee times, golfthemeadows.com. Summer is finally here. Got great weather here on the horizon. So if you want to book a great tee time and you want to check out one of the best courses around, highly recommend the Meadows at Mystic Lake. Go book that next tee time right now, golfthemeadows.com.
Our friends at Dennis Kirk are here too for all you riders out there, all you Ragnars riding motorcycles, ATVs, UTVs, dirt bikes with your braids flowing, all the top brands at DennisKirk.com with over 185,000 parts, apparel, and accessories, same-day shipping, and free shipping on orders over $89. You can also get financing plans as low as 0% for up to 12 months as well. DennisKirk.com, a great place to find things for your ride. DennisKirk.com. Okay.
Everybody hold your water.
Let's go around the world of football and football media, where we land on the Rich Eisen show. Kevin O'Connell made an appearance on the Rich Eisen show yesterday. Just a couple of snippets here. I'm just going to read a couple of quotes. Declan went back and listened to this and sent us some key things. One being the way he characterized Dalton Risner's position on this roster. Kevin O'Connell said, quote, "We bring back Dalton Risner, who's going to compete like crazy at the guard spot with both Ed Ingram and Blake Brandel." So he is confirming that this is a three-way competition for two guard spots by throwing Ed Ingram's name in there. And the way I'll read it again. "We bring back Dalton Risner, who's going to compete like crazy at the guard spot with both Ed Ingram and Blake Brandel." I take it to mean Ed and Blake are the incumbents, but Risner is competing and pushing at both those spots. Mm-hmm. May the best men win coming out of training camp.
And so Dalton played, he has played left guard every snap he's played in the National Football League for the Broncos and then Vikings, but he did play right guard and, if I'm not mistaken, some right tackle in college. So he's got experience there. Interesting, they're opening the door for the first time, maybe ever, to Ingram actually having to win a job.
Even as a rookie, he didn't have to compete,
No.
right?
Well, and how many times did we all suggest that he perhaps should be benched for a few games, and they didn't do that? And then he was the starter for all of last season as well. So I think I find it, I can't decide if they're trying to like remove some of the pressure off of Blake by saying, hey, he's competing at right guard too, or if they're trying to apply pressure on good old Ed, who was a disaster as a rookie, took some positive steps in 2023, but still was not great. It'll be interesting to see when we get to training camp practices where Dalton is as a backup. That's going to tell us a lot.
Yeah.
I think for one of the obviously like the weakest position, or the people that have questions on, which we just talked about being disrespected at the guard positions, them probably having like open competition is good, because they don't really know who's going to start there yet, and they need to address it immediately. And you only have internal options right now, so you may as well like bring back Dalton Risner and try to compete for both those spots. I think in general that's going to end up being a good thing.
Where do you guys rank a good guard battle in terms of interesting things at training camp? Just a good old war in the trenches at
if it's
left
at right
guard.
Football.
If it's at right guard, I'm very curious about that. And I think the telltale will be this. When the second team reps start in late July in practice and then early August, if Risner is working second team at right guard, I think it's on. Because if he's at left guard, he's played there a ton, and that's just going to be a bit of status quo. But if I'm going to seriously consider him competing at right guard and I'm the Vikings offensive staff, I want him to take reps at a place he hasn't played a lot, especially of late. So if he's at right guard when they start training camp practices with the second team, I think we got a good old-fashioned battle for Ed Ingram's job.
Let's go. Okay, here's another item.
Green 18! Green 18!
From KOC on the Rich Eisen show. He did sort of float that J.J. McCarthy has taken some reps with the first team offense. Not in front of media, though. So this might be maybe like in some of the OTAs that weren't covered by the media.
Right.
And he said, quote, "It's going to be a competitive training camp, but we do have a plan for JJ long term. We see him as our starting quarterback of the future. When that ultimately starts with him taking game reps under center will really be about his process to getting there and demonstrating he's got total comfort in the system. So a lot of words and a lot of sort of just calming down the pressures. Mm-hmm. But he did float to Rich Eisen that there have been some reps that McCarthy has taken with the number one offense. But it's interesting that they've shielded, if those reps have indeed taken place, right, they aren't taking place in front of media jackals like sports dad Judd Zolgad and the Alec Lewises and the Kevin Seiferts of the world who have their recording devices out and their field goggles.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, that would have been, well, actually, by the time, full disclosure, by the time they start actual team reps, we're not allowed to film. So, like, we can film individual stuff, 7-on-7s right now. When they do team stuff, we can't film it. But, yes, I think what he said in the second part that you read, what O'Connell said there is far more important, which is there's a process here. I don't think they're going to deviate from it. I don't think they're going to panic. I don't think they're going to say, oh my God, Sam Darnold, he's still good old Sammy boy. We can't trust him. I think they have a very definite set plan and vision, which comes from multiple people, starting with O'Connell. So I think that's the most important thing. I think what we've seen is what we're going to get. And I agree with it. There is no reason to put pressure on this kid. Zero.
Yeah, we talked about this on Purple Daily on Draft 2 yesterday, of them just kind of putting the protective bubble wrap and also shielding him from media and from availabilities and stuff. And at the end of the day, it's a good thing. Like, there's no need for him to be thrown into the wolves. Sam Darnold, as much as I have, still kind of believe there might be more of a camp battle here for the starting quarterback job, it's obviously being completely sold to us that it's Sam Darnold's job and it's going to be his job. So we're not going to make this into an awkward situation where, Zach Wilson epically fails with the Jets and other quarterbacks that had to be the man right away, and that obviously didn't go very well. And when you just look at better quarterbacks, they were shielded. They were kind of brought along slowly and gradually to the point where then they did become really good players. Patrick Mahomes with the Chiefs, obviously, is a perfect example. So I think them shielding him in general is actually a good thing. I know we want to talk to him and see him and do all that stuff. That's normal. But them probably protecting him is for his best interest.
Right now, on June 11th, 2024, I don't want to see J.J. McCarthy until 2025 in a regular season game. Like, I don't need to see it. Preferably, Sam Darnold plays really well, has a Baker Mayfield, sort of Geno Smith resurgent season. It breathes life into his career. The Vikings are competitive. Maybe they win 8 or 9 games and they flirt with or snag a wild card spot. And then we get the full 2025 offseason tour of J.J. McCarthy starting quarterback. I think the Patrick Mahomes plan that Declan brought up, that would be best case scenario for me. Now, the Chiefs were a playoff team perennially with Alex Smith. They were like an 11-win team. I think they maybe even won a playoff game either the year before or the year that they drafted him. And so they had a playoff caliber team and a really reliable, established top 15 to 20 quarterback in Alex Smith. Mm-hmm. Darnold is not inside the top 15 or 20 right now. So they kind of knew, Alex Smith is a bona fide top 15 NFL quarterback. Unless there's an injury, he's going to play all year. There's more uncertainty if we had the same certainty the Chiefs had with Alex Smith as if Sam Darnold had that certainty, I think it'd be a foregone conclusion. J.J. McCarthy does not play in 2024. I don't need to see him in 2024. That's where I'm at right now.
And this current plan, it does not assure, it's not now assured, well, if he doesn't play, he's going to be a Pro Bowl quarterback, but it gives him a better chance. It gives him a better chance. And look, it was very clear from going back and listening to O'Connell talk to Eisen as well, that Kevin O'Connell, and I know he did not succeed, but as a third-round pick of the Patriots, he has a basis of knowledge of how to handle things when it comes to young QBs and how not to do it. And so I think we have to defer to him on the process. All I know is that it's very rare that when you rush a guy in and basically say, okay, God, please save us, it's very rare that it looks like it works.
Yeah. Okay, another item here for you guys.
Everybody hold your water.
What's funny is we were actually going to do this one last week, but the report still stands because the information has not been made public by the NFL. A Falcons tampering ruling was potentially going to come down by last Friday. And this is what Adam Schefter, and obviously it hasn't yet. We're sitting here on Tuesday, but Adam Schefter said a resolution in the alleged free agent tampering cases of the Falcons and Eagles is likely to come this week, per league sources. The Falcons have been investigated for the contact they may or may not have had with then free agent quarterback Kirk Cousins before he signed with Atlanta. The Eagles have been investigated similarly for Saquon Barkley contact. The league has spoken to various members of both organizations. One league source indicated the Falcons' alleged transgressions are considered more significant and the discipline is expected to be more severe for Atlanta. Mike Florio then added, thanks to Cousins' candor, it's already the most blatant case of tampering we've seen. If, as it seems, the Falcons decided to pretend the tampering rules don't exist, who knows how many other violations occurred? Indeed, we first thought of potential tampering before Cousins said a word, given that the Falcons somehow became sufficiently comfortable enough to give him $100 million guaranteed, with Cousins posting nothing but a video of him throwing passes on a tennis court.
Yep.
Will it be a first-round pick? Will it be more than a first-round pick? People in league circles are floating the theory that the Falcons took Penix because they knew they wouldn't have a first-round pick in the ensuing season. My question is, do the Vikings get anything out of this? If you're the Vikings, you had at least publicly plans to bring back Kirk. And if the Falcons inserted themselves before they were allowed to sway, like you had an exclusive negotiating window with Kirk Cousins. Now, I think everyone knows this show was ready to move on and go draft somebody, but
right.
But you had an exclusive negotiating window, and the Falcons interfered with that, allegedly. Shouldn't the Vikings get something out of this punishment?
I told you, I went back through, and the one case that people point to is the Cardinals hiring Jonathan Gannon, who the Cardinals then admitted to tampering with, and the teams agreed on what the punishment was going to be. As far as I can find in the rest of the tampering cases, it's almost always when the league comes down, they strip a draft pick or draft picks, but that you get nothing back. So Tom Brady and the Dolphins had a couple of them. I can't find any case where a team that was the aggrieved party, as lawyers like to say, I can't find cases where they were then compensated. So Vikings fans will say we should have the Falcons first round pick or second round pick, because I do think they're going to get hit hard. Yeah. But that being said, I cannot find any legitimate punishment that would see the Vikings being compensated.
Okay. This is our guy. Until he's a free agent, he is under contract with us, and you are putting a wrench into our conversations with him.
Which is what O'Connell alluded to at the Combine. I think when he did a sit down, he alluded to and was sort of laughing, but you could tell he was sort of pissed off. So the Vikings knew this. And then Kirk, he outed his own new team. So
yeah. Oh, so there's your hard count here, folks.
Green 18! Green 18!
Around the NFL, some good Vikings fodder there. Tomorrow we have Write That Down predictions, and we are hoping to have a special guest as well tomorrow. And I don't know if we land the special guest, if that will be posted probably tomorrow, right, Dex? Maybe for Thursday, probably tomorrow.
Yeah, right away. Yep.
So we're looking forward to that.
Bang.
Maybe we'll go live. Maybe we can go live.
Maybe we go live.
Special guest. I might
Gotta talk to the powers that be. We'll see if that works. There's a baseball game too. A lot of things happening. Got Write That Down predictions.
A lot of balls in the air.
Special guests. A lot of balls in the air. I have an investigative thing I got to figure out in the Twins clubhouse after talking to Plouffe today. A lot of balls in the air.
I feel like Plouffe was about to crack, by the way, but that's
he almost tampered. Speaking of tampering, I thought he was going to tamper.
Every step of the way, he kept saying, I really shouldn't talk about this, but here's a little bit more of a morsel of information.
Morsels. Just kept it was following a breadcrumb.
Yeah, if you're a Twins fan and you haven't already checked out the Score North Twin Show podcast, we got Trevor Plouffe on Tuesdays. There's a brand new YouTube channel, the Score North Twin Show YouTube channel. You can find a link to it on the Purple Daily YouTube channel. So check it out if you're looking for some Twins baseball discussions this summer. And we'll see you guys tomorrow here. Daily Vikings Entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.